bell above the glass door of Brew and Bounty, a sleek, upscale coffee shop in downtown Nashville, chimed softly as Jim Callahan pushed it open. At 68, Jim moved with a deliberate slowness, his polished walnut cane tapping the polished hardwood floor. His face, weathered by years under the Tennessee sun and the weight of countless missions, bore deep lines around kind hazel eyes that still flickered with quiet defiance. A fall during a night op in Iraq had left him with a permanent limp, but he carried himself with the dignity of a man who'd faced worse than pain. His gray flannel jacket, clean but slightly frayed at the cuffs, hung over a pressed white shirt and khaki slacks. Pinned discreetly inside the lapel, visible only when he shifted the fabric, was a row of miniature medals. A Distinguished Service Cross, a bronze star with a V for valor, and a Purple Heart, among others. They weren't for show, just a private nod to a life of service, worn today because it was the anniversary of a brutal firefight in Fallujah he'd never quite shaken. Brew and Bounty was all exposed brick Edison bulbs and overpriced organic everything. The air smelled of roasted coffee beans and fresh-baked scones, and the clientele, mostly young professionals and hipsters, tapped away on laptops or scrolled through their phones. Jim felt a little out of place, but he'd heard their coffee was worth the hype, and their website boasted a 10% discount for veterans and seniors. He had been craving a good cup of black coffee and a moment to read the morning paper, so he'd made the trek from his modest one-bedroom apartment in East Nashville, where he lived on his VA pension and disability checks. He approached the counter, where a barista in his mid-20s, sporting a man bun and a black apron with the shop's logo, was wiping down the espresso machine. The name tag pinned to his chest read Tyler. Jim cleared his throat politely. "Morning. I'd like a large black coffee, please." Tyler barely looked up, punching buttons on the register with practiced indifference. "That's $5.25. Name for the order?" "Jim," he replied, then added, "I believe you offer a veteran's discount." He opened his jacket just enough to reveal the ribbon bar, the metals catching the soft light. He slid his VA ID card across the counter, its edges worn from years, in his wallet. Tyler's eyes flicked to the card, then snagged on the medals. A smirk curled his lips, sharp and mocking. "Veterans discount, huh?" His voice carried a drawl, not the warm Southern kind, but something performative, like he was auditioning for a role as the cool guy. "What are those, props from a thrift store? You some kind of weekend warrior?" Jim's jaw tightened, his hand pausing on the counter. The medals weren't props. Each one was a shard of memory, blood-soaked sand, the roar of gunfire, brothers who never came home. "These are my service medals," he said, his voice low but steady, the kind of calm that comes from decades of discipline. "And this is a valid VA card." Tyler snorted, loud enough to draw a glance from a nearby customer. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the counter, his smirk widening. Right. Costume jewelry for your war hero cosplay. Look, Pops, we get all kinds. Trying to scam a free latte. Veterans discount needs an active military ID, not some shiny pins from a flea market." He shared a conspiratorial grin with another barista, a young woman named Kaylee, who was restocking pastries and had paused to eavesdrop. She stifled a giggle, shaking her head. Jim's grip on his cane tightened, the wood creaking under his knuckles. He could feel the heat creeping up his neck, a mix of anger and something deeper, humiliation. "This card," he said, tapping the VA ID, "is my identification for these purposes. And those pins, as you call them, include a Distinguished Service Cross. You might want to look that up before you laugh." Tyler rolled his eyes, unfazed. "Distinguished whatever, man. My register don't care about your stories. It's $5.25, or you can try your little act somewhere else." Kaylee let out a full laugh this time, not even trying to hide it. The sound hit Jim like a slap, sharper than the shrapnel that had torn through his leg all those years ago. He felt the eyes of other customers, some curious, some uncomfortable, none stepping in. A woman in a blazer, presumably the manager, glanced over from a small office near the back, her name tag reading Ms. Harper. She met Jim's eyes for a split second, then turned back to her computer, clearly uninterested in what she probably saw as a minor squabble. The public mockery, so casual, so careless, cut deeper than Jim expected. These weren't just medals, they were pieces of his soul, earned in places most people only saw in movies. He'd carried wounded men through hell, watched friends die, and come home to a country that sometimes seemed to forget. And now, in this shiny coffee shop, a kid half his age was reducing it all to a punchline. His chest ached, not from his old injuries, but from the weight of being dismissed. "There's no need for disrespect, son," Jim said, his voice still even, though it trembled slightly. "I'll pay for the coffee." He reached into his wallet, pulling out a crumpled 5 and a quarter, counting each coin with deliberate care. He didn't want their discount anymore, not like this. He just wanted out, away from the smugness and the stares. Tyler scooped up the money with a flourish like he'd won some kind of victory. He printed the receipt and slapped it on the counter. "Enjoy your coffee, General," he said, the title dripping with sarcasm. Kaylee snickered again, shaking her head as she went back to her pastries. Jim took the cup and receipt without a word. His cane tapped a slow rhythm as he made his way to the door, the bell chiming again as he stepped out into the crisp October air. He didn't head home. Instead, he sank onto a wrought iron bench just outside the shop, the coffee untouched in his hand. It would taste bitter now, tainted by the encounter. He stared at the bustling street, cars honking, pedestrians rushing by, life moving on. But inside, he felt a hollowness, a fatigue that had nothing to do with his age or his injuries. It was the ache of being erased, of having his life's work mocked by someone who'd never understand. His fingers brushed the metals inside his jacket, tracing their familiar edges. Each one held a story. The Distinguished Service Cross for dragging a wounded sergeant to safety under fire, the Purple Heart for the shrapnel that still sent twinges through his leg on cold days, the Bronze Star for a night he'd rather forget. Costume jewelry, the words echoed, stinging anew. He wasn't one for confrontations, not anymore, but this wasn't just about him. It was about the uniform, the flag, the men who hadn't made it back. It was about respect, or the lack of it. Jim pulled out his phone, an old Samsung that still worked just fine. He scrolled through his contacts, hesitating when he reached a name he hadn't called in years, General Marcus Hawk Thornton. Hawk had been his brigade commander in Iraq, a no-nonsense leader who'd once told Jim, "You ever need me, you call. Doesn't matter when or why." Jim had never taken him up on it, until now. His thumb hovered over the call button. This wasn't just about a cup of coffee or a discount. It was about something bigger, something worth fighting for. He pressed the button, and the phone began to ring. The Nashville morning buzzed around Jim Callahan as he sat on the cold wrought iron bench outside Bruin Bounty, his untouched coffee growing colder by the second. The sting of Tyler's words, costume jewelry, burned deeper than any wound he'd carried from Iraq. It wasn't just about him. It was about every soldier who'd bled beside him. Every name etched on a wall he'd visited too many times at the VA cemetery. The medals pinned inside his jacket weren't trinkets. They were anchors, tethering him to brothers lost, to nights of gunfire and grief, to a promise he'd made to keep their memory alive. And now, in this glossy coffee shop, that promise had been spat on by a kid who'd never know the weight of a rucksack or the cost of a salute. Jim's hand trembled as he held his old Samsung, the screen glowing with General Marcus Hawk Thornton's number. Hawk, a legend in the 101st Airborne, was a man who'd faced down chaos in Baghdad and never flinched. His voice, even years later, carried the kind of authority that could silence a room or rally a battalion. Jim hadn't wanted to make this call. He'd spent decades swallowing slights, keeping his head down. But this was different. This was about the code, the unspoken vow that bound every soldier, active or retired. You don't let disrespect slide, not when it dishonors the fallen. He pressed call. The phone rang once, twice, then a gravelly voice answered, sharp as ever. "Thornton?" "General Thornton, sir, it's Jim Callahan, Master Sergeant Callahan, retired from your old command, 101st. Jim's voice cracked, betraying the emotion he'd tried to bury. A pause, then warmth flooded the line. "Jim, hell, it's been too damn long. You holding up, Master Sergeant?" "Barely, sir," Jim admitted. then recounted the incident at Brew and Bounty with the precision of a mission report. Tyler's mockery, the snickers from Kaylee, the manager's indifference, the public humiliation. He wasn't whining. He'd never been that man. But he felt the weight of something larger. It's not just me, General. It's what those medals stand for. They mocked the uniform, sir. They mocked all of us. The line went quiet, but Jim could almost hear the shift in Hawk's tone, the cold fury of a commander whose soldiers had been wronged. Brew and Bounty on 12th Avenue. Hawk's voice was steel now, the kind that preceded action. You still there, Jim? Yes, sir. On a bench out front? Stay put, Master Sergeant. I'm 3 blocks away, just finished a breakfast with the governor. My schedule's about to take a detour. 5 minutes. The line clicked dead. Jim lowered the phone, his heart pounding. He hadn't expected Hawk to come himself. A call to corporate, maybe, or a stern email. But Hawk Thornton didn't do half measures. Jim stared at the coffee cup, its Brew and Bounty logo mocking him, and felt a flicker of something he hadn't in years. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, someone still cared enough to fight for what was right. Inside the shop, the hum of conversation and clinking mugs continued, oblivious to the storm brewing. Tyler was behind the counter, regaling Kaylee with how he'd shut down some old faker, his laughter sharp and careless. Customers scrolled their phones, sipped oat milk lattes, and ignored the world. The soothing indie playlist looped through the speakers, a curated bubble of Nashville chic. Then, at exactly 8:42 a.m., the music cut off. A sharp crackle split the air, followed by silence so abrupt it felt like the room had stopped breathing. Customers looked up, confused. Tyler froze mid-sentence, his smirk fading. Even Miss Harper, the manager, poked her head out of her office, frowning at the ceiling. A voice boomed through the speakers, not the usual chipper barista announcement, but a deep, commanding baritone that seemed to shake the very walls. Attention, Brew and Bounty patrons and staff. This is General Marcus Thornton, United States Army, retired. Your immediate attention is required. The store went still. Phones dropped to tables. Cups paused mid-sip. Tyler's face drained of color, his hands gripping the counter. Kaylee's pastry tray slipped, a scun hitting the floor. The voice continued, each word a hammer strike. I stand in this establishment because a man of unparalleled courage, Master Sergeant James Callahan, a decorated combat veteran who served this nation for 25 years, was just disgraced at your counter. This man, who earned the Distinguished Service Cross for saving lives under fire, who bears the Purple Heart for wounds sustained in defense of your freedom, too was mocked. His service medals, symbols of sacrifice, of brothers lost, of battles won at a cost you cannot fathom, were called costume jewelry by an employee named Tyler. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Customers turned, searching for Jim, for Tyler, for the general. Tyler's knees buckled, his bravado gone, replaced by a dawning terror. Miss Harper rushed onto the floor, her blazer askew, her face a mask of panic. "Where is he?" she hissed to Kaylee, who could only shake her head. General Thornton's voice grew heavier, laced with a grief that cut through the room like a blade. Master Sergeant Callahan didn't just serve. He carried men to safety, through hell. He buried friends. He came home with scars you'll never see. And he asked for nothing but a cup of coffee and the respect he's earned. Instead, you gave him scorn. You gave him laughter. And your manager, Miss Harper, stood by and did nothing. The silence was suffocating. A woman at a nearby table wiped her eyes, her coffee forgotten. A young man in a hoodie, who'd been scrolling TikTok moments ago, stared at the floor, shame creeping into his posture. The weight of Thornton's words wasn't just about Jim. It was about every veteran, every sacrifice, every flag-draped coffin that deserved better. "I'm here," Thornton continued, "because disrespect like this is a wound to every soldier who ever swore an oath, and it will not stand. Effective immediately, 3 things will happen. First, Tyler and Miss Harper will apologize to Master Sergeant Callahan face to face with the sincerity of those who've learned a brutal lesson. Second, Brew and Bounty will make a $25,000 0 cents Donation to the Wounded Warrior Project in Callahan's name. A small atonement for this insult. My office will ensure it happens. Third, this store will close for the rest of the day. Every employee will attend a mandatory training session on respect with a focus on honoring veterans, led by my foundation's instructors. You will learn what those medals mean, or you will not work here. The speakers clicked off, leaving a silence so profound it felt sacred. Then, from the back of the store, General Marcus Thornton emerged. Even in a tailored Navy suit, his military bearing was unmistakable. Broad shoulders, eyes like a hawk's, every step radiating authority. He'd commandeered the PA system from a stunned assistant manager, and now he strode onto the main floor, his presence parting the crowd like a ship through water. Ms. Harper scrambled toward him, wringing her hands. General, I'm so sorry. This is a misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding. Thornton cut her off, his voice low but unyielding, like a blade drawn slow. This is a failure of decency. Where is Callahan? As if on cue, a young employee sent by the assistant manager hurried outside and found Jim on the bench. Sir, please come back in, she stammered, her eyes wide with awe and fear. Jim rose, his cane steady, and followed her, unsure what awaited but feeling the tide shifting. As he stepped through the door, the crowd parted, and he saw Thornton, the man who'd once pinned a medal on his chest in a dusty forward operating base. Their eyes met, and Thornton's stern face softened, just for a moment, with the bond of shared battles. Master Sergeant, Thornton said, his voice carrying across the room. I'm sorry it came to this, but no soldier of mine stands alone. He turned to Ms. Harper and Tyler, who stood like deer in headlights. Apologize. Now. Tyler's voice shook as he stammered. I didn't know, sir. I'm sorry. I didn't mean. His words faltered under Thornton's gaze. Ms. Harper's apology was barely coherent, her face red with shame. Jim listened, his expression unreadable, then gave a single nod, the kind that said he'd heard enough but wouldn't forget. Thornton's eyes swept the room, landing on every employee, every customer. This isn't just about one man. It's about what we owe those who serve. You will close this store, you will learn, and you will do better. He turned to Jim, placing a hand on his shoulder. Let's get you a real cup of coffee, Jim. Somewhere that knows what honor means. As Thornton led Jim out, the crowd erupted in murmurs, some of support, some of shock. A woman in her 30s, tears streaming down her face, whispered, My dad was a Marine. Thank you. A veteran in a ball cap saluted Jim silently, his eyes wet. The bell chimed as the door closed behind them, leaving Brew and Bounty to face the reckoning Thornton had promised. The bell above Brew and Bounty's door fell silent as General Marcus Hawk Thornton and Master Sergeant Jim Callahan stepped out into the Nashville morning, leaving behind a shop frozen in the wake of Thornton's righteous fury. The crowd inside buzzed with whispers, some of awe, others of shame, as the reality of what had just transpired sank in. Tyler, the barista who'd mocked Jim's medals, stood behind the counter, his face pale, his hands trembling as he avoided the eyes of customers now staring at him with a mix of pity and disdain. Miss Harper, the manager, was already barking orders to close the shop, her voice shrill with panic as if she could outrun the consequences of her indifference. But the air in Brew and Bounty had changed, charged with the weight of Thornton's words, a reminder that honor once trampled demands reckoning. Outside, Jim leaned on his cane, his heart still racing from the confrontation. He'd never been one for the spotlight, but Thornton's defense had stirred something deep within him, a flicker of pride he thought he'd buried long ago. The general, his suit crisp despite the morning's chaos, clapped a hand on Jim's shoulder, his grip firm but warm. You don't deserve this, Jim, Thornton said, his voice gruff with emotion. No soldier does. Let's get you a proper cup of coffee, somewhere that knows the meaning of respect. As they walked away, the shop's glass doors swung shut behind them, and the open sign flipped to closed with a finality that echoed Thornton's command. Inside, employees were herded toward the back room, where a retired gunnery sergeant dispatched by Thornton's Veteran Support Foundation awaited. The gunny, a grizzled Marine with a voice like gravel and eyes that'd seen too much, stood ready to deliver a training session that would leave no room for ignorance. "You're going to learn what those medals mean," he growled, pointing at a display of service ribbons he'd brought. "And you're going to learn why you never, ever disrespect a veteran." The staff, Tyler included, sat in stunned silence, their usual banter replaced by the weight of their failure. Customers asked to leave lingered outside, some snapping photos of the closed sign, others posting about the incident on social media. A young woman, her eyes red from crying, typed furiously on her phone. "Just saw a general shut down a coffee shop for disrespecting a veteran. This is what real leadership looks like. Honor our vets." An older man in a Vietnam-era cap nodded approvingly, muttering, "About damn time someone stood up." The story was already spreading, a spark that would soon ignite Nashville's airwaves and beyond. Thornton led Jim to a small diner a block away. A no-frills spot called Rosie's, with checkered tablecloths and a jukebox playing Johnny Cash. The waitress, a woman in her 50s, asked with a warm smile, recognized Thornton immediately. His face had been on local news for his veteran advocacy. "General, good to see you," she said, then turned to Jim, her eyes catching the faint glint of his medals inside his jacket. "And you, sir, thank you for your service." Jim nodded, a lump in his throat. It was the first time all morning he'd felt seen. They settled into a booth, and Thornton ordered 2 black coffees and a plate of biscuits and an egg, insisting Jim eat something hearty. As the food arrived, the general leaned forward, his piercing gaze softening. "Jim, I haven't forgotten you," he said. "That day in Fallujah, when you pulled Sergeant Lopez out of that kill zone, you saved more than his life. You gave us all hope. Don't let some punk kid take that from you." Jim stared into his coffee, the steam curling like memories. "It's not just the kid, sir," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's the years since. The VA appointments, the bills, the feeling like nobody remembers. Today, it just broke something." Thornton's jaw tightened, but his eyes were kind. "You're not alone, Master Sergeant. Not today. Not ever." He pulled a card from his wallet, sliding it across the table. "This is my direct line, and it's linked to my foundation. Housing, health care, benefits, navigation. Whatever you need, we'll make it happen. No soldier of mine gets left behind." His voice cracked just for a moment, revealing the weight he carried for every veteran he'd sworn to protect. They talked for an hour, reminiscing about old missions, laughing over stories of boot camp pranks, and sharing the quiet pain of lives shaped by war. Jim spoke of his struggles, how his apartment's rent kept climbing, how the VA's backlog left him waiting for months, how he sometimes felt like a ghost in his own country. Thornton listened, not as a general, but as a brother in arms, and when they parted, he gripped Jim's hand. "You call me, Jim, day or night. That's an order." Back at Brew and Bounty, the training session was in full swing. The gunny's voice boomed, recounting stories of sacrifice tied to each medal, his words searing into the staff's consciences. Tyler, sitting in the front row, kept his head down, tears streaking his face as the gunny described the cost of a Purple Heart. "You think that's costume jewelry?" the gunny snapped, holding up a replica. "That's blood. That's loss. That's a man who'll never walk right again because he chose to stand between you and a bullet." Tyler nodded, unable to speak, his arrogance shattered. The next morning, Brew and Bounty reopened, but it wasn't the same. A new sign hung prominently by the entrance, bold and unmistakable. "We proudly offer a 15% discount to all veterans and active duty military. Thank you for your service." Customers noticed a shift. Tyler, now quiet and respectful, rang up orders with a deference that bordered on reverence. Miss Harper, her managerial swagger gone, personally checked IDs for veteran discounts, her hands shaking as she processed each one. The training had worked, or perhaps it was the fear of Thornton's wrath, but the shop's culture had been reborn. The story of the general, the sergeant, and the coffee shop shut down spread like wildfire. Local news picked it up, then national outlets, with headlines like "General shuts down Nashville cafe for disrespecting hero." Social media erupted, with "Honor Our Vets" trending as people shared their own stories of veterans slighted or forgotten. A GoFundMe started by a customer raised thousands for Jim's medical bills, though he insisted most of it go to other veterans in need. Nashville's mayor invited Thornton and Jim to a city council meeting, where they were honored with a standing ovation, Jim's medals gleaming under the lights as he stood, cane in hand, fighting back tears. But the story didn't end there. Late that night, Jim sat in his apartment, the TV flickering with a news segment about the incident. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Master Sergeant Callahan, this is Colonel Elena Ruiz, 101st Airborne. Heard what happened. We're organizing a veterans rally in Nashville next week. We'd be honored if you'd speak. Your story matters. Jim stared at the message, his chest tight. He'd spent years avoiding attention, content to fade into the background. But Thornton's words echoed. No soldier stands alone. He typed a reply, his fingers slow but steady. I'll be there. As he hit send, a knock came at his door. Puzzled, he rose, cane tapping, and opened it to find a package on the mat. No sender, just a note. For the soldier who never gave up. Inside was a framed photo of his old unit in Iraq, the men he'd fought beside, their faces young and fearless. Tucked beside it was a single dog tag etched with a name he hadn't spoken in years. Sergeant Lopez, the man he'd saved. Jim clutched the dog tag, tears spilling down his weathered cheeks. The past and present collided, a reminder that his fight wasn't over. Somewhere out there, someone was watching, someone who knew the truth of his sacrifice. And as Nashville slept, a city stirred, ready to rally behind a man whose quiet courage had sparked a movement. The question lingered, unanswered. Who had sent the package, and what did they know about Jim's past that even he had forgotten?